The Edmonton Oilers have the perception of being an elite power play. While featuring amazing players like Connor McDavid and Draisaitl, the Oilers' power play took a step back year over year. On today's edition of Locked On Oilers, we explore what went wrong and what the Oilers can do going forward to improve their special teams unit.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. This upcoming NHL season will be my fourth as a host on the Locked On Podcast Network, and I want to thank everyone that is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we've got your Edmonton Oilers covered every day. And on today's show, we are going to walk through all things power play. We'll talk philosophy. We'll talk about structure. We'll talk about the underlying numbers, what they say year over year about the Oilers special teams unit, my theory as to why it regressed year over year. And then in our final segment, we will pivot to talking about some strategic improvements and some methodology improvements. So to start things out, and I do want to make sure I'm clear about this, I am definitely guilty of this, and I know most hockey prognosticators, content people, columnists, journalists, podcasters, we can be guilty of this at times, of saying, well, that team's just a power play. Well, that team's too reliant on their power play. Yes, in the grand scheme of things, in the big picture, when a team has a particularly dominant power play, they can use it as a crutch. They can use it as means of filling in a gap. And while I think that framing is perhaps a little bit of a negative lens that, well, they're too reliant on their power play, so their 5-on-5 isn't good enough. I do think that is the case most of the time. But in some cases, there are teams where their best players are so good that their power play being as effective, efficient, dominant as it is an integral part of how that team wants to play. You know, that is a baked in component to that team's success. And I know the Oilers, and we've talked about this a lot, have the perception of being an elite power play. And they have two of the 3-4 scariest players in the entire world on their same special teams unit. They have a guy who had 140 points. They have a guy who led the league in goals. They are one of the handful of teams that has multiple Hart Trophy winners on the same team. And look, yes, there are some guys who have hung on, like Corey Perry, because technically the Oilers had 3 former Hart Trophy winners on the team last year with Perry, McDavid, and Draisaitl. But of course, you get what I'm saying here. When you have two guys who are still in the primes of their careers, and you have a fringe Norris candidate in Evan Bouchard, you have a former first overall pick in Nugent Hopkins, and you have a 50-goal guy. Of course, that's a one-time thing, but Zach Hyman does get to be called a 50-goal scorer in the National Hockey League for the rest of his life. You know, that'll be the first word, that'll be the first descriptor word after the comma after his name, unless he wins a Stanley Cup or wins an individual award or, you know, eventually becomes a coach or a general manager. For the most part, Zach Hyman's going to be called Zach Hyman 50-goal scorer. And power plays are a fluid game state. They are an ebb and flow within the game. And the Oilers, as a team that doesn't take a lot of penalties, at least in the regular season, they did take a lot of them in that Kings series and again in the Panthers series. When you don't take a lot of penalties, referees are very inclined to let things go. There is a real balls and strikes methodology of how referees choose to adjudicate what is and isn't a penalty. I know everybody who was very kind to let me know in the comments of the episode after Game 3 where the Panthers the Oilers let the game get away from them. They got a little too frustrated. They got a little too angry. They took a ton of penalties down the backstretch. And look, the Panthers get away with a lot. They very clearly know where the line is and know what they can get away with. They know that if the Oilers don't take a lot of penalties, the referees are going to be inclined to say, well, we can't call 4 straight penalties on the Panthers, even if they've taken or committed 4 straight penalties, because we got to keep the game even. We got to keep the game balanced. And that's the first real point to understand here. There is a real inclination, because referees call the games with a keep it even mindset, that opportunities are not as present. So starting there, I'm going to click over to my notes here and go up to the section just on the raw numbers. So last year, the Oilers, in the regular season, 350 minutes of power play time, 23rd in the NHL. The year before, 23-24, where they have the 5th best power play in the NHL in the regular season. 360 minutes of power play time. That was 31st in the NHL 2 years ago. Again, think about it just in terms of the raw opportunities, the minutes in the game, and over the course of a full season. We're talking about 4.5 minutes per game on average of power play time. That doesn't sound like a whole lot because it isn't. When you're only and of course that evens out because you're talking about the minutes you're on the penalty kill as well. So the other team has that 4 to 5 minutes. So overall, you're talking about, 8 to 12 minutes of special teams time within a given game, not just these 4 minutes, because penalty kill is a part of this as well. But power play is a volatile game state. We all know this. We all understand that the whole point is one team is at a structural disadvantage. It is your responsibility. It is your job as the team with 5 players, or 4 if it's 4-on-3, to manipulate the defense and to use the space available to you. Then when you go a level below that, 215 power plays this past season, 23rd most. 206 power plays against. 9th fewest, so that puts you right around that 22-23 mark. That tells you the game is not as available to them. And then I wanted to hit on this as well before we take our first break. There's a perception that because the Oilers have stars that they get protected. And are there cases where player safety or the league at large might be a little more lenient? McDavid getting the 2 games for the Connor Garland cross-check where he probably could have gotten more. Has Draisaitl done some stuff that's maybe been worthy of suspension in the past? Yeah, of course. But this is a star-driven league, and one of the benefits of being a great player, of being a really special player, is that you're entitled to the benefit of the doubt because you are, the boat that raises all tides. And that's the trick here. You are towing a very fine line where you don't want to turn into those early 2010s Penguins where everybody hates your guts. They think you're a bunch of flopping whiners, where you're Sidney Crosby thinks he can get every single call he wants. And the Oilers don't do that. By and large, the Oilers don't. Is there a perception of the Oilers as being whiny, as being a little bit, I won't say disingenuous, but is there a perception of the Oilers as being a little sour grapes? I think so. After the Stanley Cup Final, in particular the way Game 3 went, where the game ended with that final 10 minutes with all of those penalties, Evander Kane getting tossed, I do think some people look at the Oilers and see, well, they have a bunch of stars, they're a bunch of whiny babies, they're not that good. I think you're missing the boat there when you take that view. And look, I understand the reductionist perception. We exist in a results-based business. If the Oilers won playing that way, nobody would be judging them. But again, when you exist in a results-based business, you do have to win. And the Oilers, to great effect 2 years ago, ran a top 5 power play, ran a great power play in the postseason, and that was a driving force that was able to make up for some of the 5-on-5 shortcomings. And that's the way you got to think about special teams, because they're not enough of the game that you can win on them alone. But they're great for plugging in holes. They're great for, if you're a boat that's taking on water, your power play and your special teams, those are your buckets. You're throwing water off the boat in so you can buy yourself more time before your boat sinks. That's the way you got to look at special teams when you are not a dominant 5-on-5 team. And look, the Oilers in the aggregate have really good 5-on-5 numbers, but when you look at the actual goals and the actual results, that tells you a slightly different story. And there's a whole lot more to get to as far as efficiency and the raw numbers, and we are going to get there coming up next on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. So be sure to stick around. We've all been there, logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot or not come away with tickets at all. Live music should be about the fans and making memories, not dealing with the stress of getting tickets. And that's where our friends at Game Time come in clutch. Game Time makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop the closer it gets to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. If you're tired of trying to find the best bang for your buck, Game Time Zone Deals pick the best seats in your section for you. If you're wondering what your view is going to look like before you buy, this is my favorite part. They have a panoramic seat view feature that shows you exactly what you're going to get from your seat. And if you're worried about what happens if your plans change, the Game Time Guarantee has your back with cancellation protection and more. Take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers. And I've stuck to it. I've been very adamant about doing more than 3 episodes per week. We've been doing 4 for most of July since the turnover from 3 to 5 to 3. But as little as there is to talk about, you've seen it this week. We have manufactured conversation topics and are really trying to open the way you think. That's my goal here. I can do endless research. I could spend the rest of my life just alternating between Natural Stat Trick, Evolving Wild, Hockey Viz, Puck IQ, all 3 zones. I could spend the rest of my natural born life alternating between the various databases and Patreon subscriptions to try and look for more answers. I can do this for every single player and every single team in the National Hockey League because I can think of a question I have about them. And coming out of yesterday's show and the day before, where we were talking about, well, where's the Oilers offense going to come from? Are they going to score enough goals? How do we get there? Naturally, when you have a regression the way the Oilers did, and look, the percentages aren't that different. We're talking about 4 or 5%. That's the difference between 5th in the NHL and 11th in the NHL in terms of power play success rate. As long as you're over that 23% mark, you have at least a passable power play. Generally speaking, the benchmark, the key stat, is you want to be 10th in both special teams or better. 10th or better in both gives you a real chance. You supplement 2 top 10 special teams units, power play, penalty kill, with reasonable 5-on-5 results. You meet at least the statistical criteria to be a Stanley Cup contender. Of course, we can look at the Carolina Hurricanes. We can point and laugh, Corsi Canes, whatever. Against most teams, the Hurricanes are pretty good. Against Florida, is anyone good against Florida? I mean, I hate to use that cop-out, but I do have empathy for the Carolina Hurricanes, the way they've tried to build their roster, the way they tried to play. And they had the special teams this year to supplement the really good 5-on-5 play. And ultimately, Florida's best players are just more talented than Carolina's best players. And that's the drawback there. And as we recircle this conversation to the Oilers, the real key here is the degree in which there was regression. So of the statistics we're going to talk about, we have scoring chances, shots on goal, goals for, expected goals, and high danger chances. Scoring chances is any time a puck is shot at the net. It doesn't matter if it gets blocked, if it misses the net, it hits a post. All of that counts the same. Of course, that accounts for pucks that don't get to the net. So we use shots as our first point of demarcation. So it has to hit the goalie. It has to be on net. It can't get blocked. It can't miss the net. So that's the first aspect of understanding the quality conversation. On both counts, year over year, in the regular season and in the playoffs, the Oilers were far worse on the power play. So in the regular season, 17 fewer scoring chances per 60 minutes, 8 fewer shots. So right there alone, 17 fewer scoring chances per 60 minutes. And of course, because we're talking about, 5 minutes per game-ish, that's not a huge sample. So you're talking about that on a per game basis. So for example, if we were to do the math, just really rough back of the envelope math here. So we're going to say 116 for 60 minutes. So if we're only going to play 5 and we're going to do 5 so it's easier, you would do 116 divided by 12, which comes out to something in the ballpark of I want to say 9 something, 116 divided by 12, 9.67. Yes, we broke out the Locked On Oilers calculator here for the math there. But we're talking about 9 scoring chances per 60 minutes at 5-on-5. 9 scoring chances per game on the power play. That's what we're talking about there. So if you're only getting 9 scoring chances per 60 minutes, well, that's not a very high rate. When you are getting 9 scoring chances per game on the power play. That's not a whole lot. It's really not a whole lot, especially considering there are some power plays where you don't register a shot on goal. And those are the particularly frustrating ones where it feels like the Oilers are just infinitely passing the puck. There's no skater movement. The penalty killers and the goalie are relatively square. They're keeping everything in front of them. So year over year, to have a regression to that degree where, 98 scoring chances per 60. So if you were to do 98 divided by 12, you would end up with 8 scoring chances per 60 minutes. That really doesn't feel like a lot. 8 scoring chances. And look, that's 1 per game. But 1 scoring chance per game in the aggregate of 82 games, that adds up. So the next layer of this, not only did the Oilers generate fewer scoring chances, fewer shots on goal, they conceded more scoring chances against. They conceded more shots on goal against. So when you get to the actual goals, a year-over-year decrease of 1.62 does not sound like a lot, especially when you divide that out on a per-game basis. Again, because you're only getting 5-ish minutes per game of power play time on average, you are going to divide that number by 12 because 5 times 12 is 60 minutes in a game. And again, there are games where it's more penalty minutes, less penalty minutes, and that's not accounting for the penalty minutes you're on the penalty kill. But again, you get what I'm saying here. When you talk about this type of wholesale regression, where you are scoring 1.62 fewer goals per 60 minutes. And again, that comes out to a pretty small decimal when you divide that by 12. But over the course of an entire season, that accumulates. And that's the thing with these cumulative stats. On a per game basis, it's not really going to distill out. You're not going to notice it. But over the course of 82 games, yeah, that's really going to add up. And then you can quantify this even further. You go and look at the high danger chances and the expected goals. That's the real jump. And that, for me, and that's why if you're watching over on YouTube, the thumbnail features Zach Hyman. For me, the Zach Hyman factor on the power play year over year was the biggest difference. 2 years ago, the Oilers were getting the puck to the net front a lot better. And some of that is just Zach Hyman regressing, not having a career best year. We all knew that 50-goal season was the best possible outcome, and he was going to have a hard time replicating that. But to come away with less than half of what he had the year before, that's tricky. That's hard to account for. And with all of those power play goals, I think he had 9 fewer power play goals year over year. That matters in the course of a long season. 9 power play goals over the course of an entire season, that's your 5% right there, year over year difference in efficiency. And again, these numbers don't sound that big on a small scale, game to game. But over 82 games, those numbers accumulate. It adds up. It builds up. You talk about 2% better shooting percent. You talk about a slight regression in shooting percentage, not a big one, 0.33, less than 1%. But you add all that up. Fewer scoring chances, fewer shots on goal, more shots on goal on scoring chances against, fewer expected goals, fewer high danger chances, more high danger chances against, more expected goals against, all on the power play. You are painting a very clear picture. You are not shooting the puck as much. You don't have as much puck possession. The other team is having a better chance of holding on to the puck, of putting pressure on you defensively, of hitting you for shorthanded goals. And even if they don't score shorthanded, they're tiring your guys out. They're tiring your goalie, generally speaking. Those are going to be your odd man rush situations because if a penalty killer has the opportunity, they're going to try and take that 2-on-1 and make the goalie move left to right, and usually going to have Evan Bouchard in a difficult position because he's not the most fleet-footed skater. We're going to take our second and final break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we come back, I will dive a little deeper into the numbers, and we will talk about some fixes, some ideas for how to kickstart the Oilers power play and get it going in the other direction. Coming up next on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers. And I love doing investigations like this. Just hand up. This is where my hockey nerd comes out. And I want to know. I really want to know. It's not just that the power play was worse year over year. What changed? What was different? Well, you can look at the raw totals. 15 fewer power play minutes overall year over year. Okay. Fewer power play opportunities, the number of penalties that teams committed against the Oilers. Okay. So fewer opportunities. What do we always say? What are my everydayers? The more minutes you have, the better opportunities you have. So 15 minutes in the course of a season where you get almost 400 penalty minutes, that doesn't matter a whole lot, but it does matter a little bit. Does matter a little bit. So think about it from a math perspective. And look, I'm not good at math. I've said this on the show before, and it might surprise some people considering how much I use math on the show. I had to take intro to statistics in college twice. The first time, I could not do the math. It did not process. I had to DNF it. I had to drop it 6 weeks in and use my DNF on that class because I could not figure it out. The second time around, I think I got a 74, 75, something like that. It was a real challenge to get that gen ed requirement to pass a math class in college. But math like this, because I put it in hockey terms, it makes sense to me. When we are talking about averages, when we are talking about data samples, the bigger your sample, the more evidence you have, the more likely you are to be right. The smaller your sample, the more variance within it. That's why 2 whole seasons, 3, 4, 5. Like I said, I could spend the rest of my life trying to solve hockey questions with just data sheets because there's enough data to draw conclusions on some level. And 1 year of having a slightly worse power play does not indicate a trend. That is something to monitor. Now, if the Oilers go from 5th to 11th to 17th, even after changing power play coaches, that would be something to note. That would be a real cause for concern because, again, 2 Hart Trophy winners, a defenseman who can be point per game, a former 50-goal guy, and a former first overall pick. That type of talent should not be regressing to this degree. Now, ups and downs are a natural part of life. We all have highs, we all have lows. That's just the natural course of things. When you have long samples, you become more in tune with how the variance works. But I think it's interesting, and we talked about this yesterday, comparing the 2 teams year over year, because they got to the Stanley Cup Final, and you would argue this past year's team had an easier path in the postseason. They didn't get to a Game 7 in the first 3 rounds. They found a way to get through those earlier series relatively easily. I know that King series was definitely sketchy for a while there, but at large, they did a good job. And when you go and look at the numbers, and I'm clicking back over to my note sheet here, what's interesting for me is on the aggregate, on the overall, the drop-off year over year is even bigger in the playoffs. And I found that interesting. And again, we all know the Oilers power play was a lot better 2 years ago. So let's evaluate what changed. So number one, slightly less effective, slightly less efficient Zach Hyman. You have Ryan Nugent Hopkins, lowest point total in a number of seasons. So you have those 2 things together. So defenses aren't going to respect Zach Hyman at the net front as much, and they are not as occupied with Ryan Nugent Hopkins. So what does that mean? It means a lot of Evan Bouchard point shots. Bouchard led the Oilers in shots on goal in the playoffs. He does have a good shot, but those are defenseman shots. Those are not highly likely to result in goals. They are from further away. There are more variables that can be introduced on that puck's path to change the potential outcome. That's what you have to think about when you're talking about power play. So at its essence, the Oilers want to run the drop pass to McDavid in their own zone, where McDavid can scoop up the puck with speed and go. Full speed, gain the offensive zone with speed. In an ideal world, if he's not cut off, he's going to drive directly to the net. If he is cut off, he's going to pivot to the half wall, or he's going to take the puck below the goal line. Once he's established the offensive zone with possession, he's going to wait for help. Once he gains the zone and is established with puck possession, he's going to start to look for his options. Is he going to look Zach Hyman backdoor? Is he going to take the puck to the point to Bouchard? Is McDavid himself going to skate the puck upwards and try and create space for his line mates? And that's really the key here. Because as much as the Oilers look for the Draisaitl one-timer or the Bouchard point shot, they do not run a power play in the conventional sense. Most NHL teams run their power play through a fulcrum point, and that point is usually set. It's from a specific spot, and generally, it is going to be closer to the point. It is going to be a walk the puck in and then left, right, or shot. The Oilers, because McDavid is their primary puck holder on the power play, not a defenseman, he is constantly making that point, that fulcrum point of the power play different. And that has advantages. It makes the defense more off balance. He's going to bring defenders to him because he's the best hockey player in the world in a 5-on-4 situation. 2 years ago, that meant a lot of open looks for Zach Hyman. Last year, it meant a lot of looks for Leon Draisaitl. And that's another thing here. Year over year, if you don't change your personnel, if you don't change your tactics all that much, you start to form habits. And defenses, teams, they pre-scout. They start to look for ways they can impact you. One thing Florida did to great effect to the Oilers in the Stanley Cup Final, preventing them from gaining the zone at all. Because the Oilers do use that drop pass at the top of the zone as well, where McDavid, he'll build up that head of speed, gain the zone, and then drop it to Leon, to Bouch, whoever might happen to be trailing him at the point. Because they play aggressive in that right there at the top of the neutral zone, at the top of the defensive zone, they can force a change in possession, or at the very least, they can force a regroup. If they force a regroup, the puck goes back into the neutral zone. The guys who are in the zone have to come back and touch up, not to go off sides, and you're burning time. You're wasting time. And for the Oilers, gaining the zone with speed is the first part of this process. But from there, it requires a real attention to detail. And I am not in the position to tell Connor and Leon how to play hockey. They are two of the best hockey players I have ever seen. I am very adamant on this show that Connor McDavid is the best hockey player I have ever seen. I wasn't there for Gretzky. I wasn't there for Lemieux. I wasn't there for Bobby Orr or Gordie Howe. I've been here for Sid. Love Sid. At this stage of my life, Sid's one of the most accomplished, one of the most impressive players I've ever seen. McDavid is the best. He is the most dynamic, the most explosive, the greatest playmaker, the best skater. And everything he does is viewed through that lens. Can he elevate? Can he make guys better? And he led Zach Hyman to the year of his life. He got Leon a rocket Richard. When we look at it through that lens, the Oilers' power play needs to be better, period. When you have this much talent, to be 11th, that's a letdown. That is a disappointment. And I would love to find a world where the Oilers can make something happen there. Can you find a new wrinkle? Can you find a new look? Is it more flank shots from the opposite side? Are we going to try and get Nuge? Are we going to try and replace Ryan Nugent Hopkins on the power play so that's not a lefty? So that's another one-timer opportunity. That's something else. Frankly, I thought the Oilers struggled with at points was just the handedness distribution. Leon on the one side for the one-timer, yes, of course. But with Nuge being on the opposite circle, the puck has to go to the opposite side for him to shoot. That's unfortunate. Zach Hyman on the forehand at the net front, that's golden. That's what you want. That's really your key here. The power play is so much about angles. It is so much about spacing. Can you find ways to create new looks? You can't have so many Bouchard point shots. You can't just expect Leon to score every time. As good as he is, God bless him. You know, he scored 54 goals this year. As good as these guys are, the tactics went out in the long run. And as great as they are at making plays outside of structure, they do need that structure to fall back on when their plays are not working. That'll do it for today's very detailed power play episode of Locked On Oilers. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Leave the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over if you're listening, over on Apple or Spotify. If you're over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. Let me know. You think the power play comes back this year, or are they going to start to be more towards the middle of the pack? I will talk to you guys on Monday. Everyone have a safe and fun weekend. Be sure to check out Locked On NHL, where Hunter Hodes and I played a game of NHL 20 questions. And be sure to check out the NHL season previews that Locked On NHL Game Night has going on. All 32 teams leading up to the start of the 2025-2026 NHL season. I'll see you guys on Monday. Everyone have a safe and fun weekend. And until then, let's go Oilers.